Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang. Adrian is on assignment. Tonight, with COVID cases spiking and demands rising, Alberta takes action.
We believe these are the minimum restrictions needed right now to safeguard our healthcare system.
Is it enough to make a difference?
And the patient's coughing his lungs out, but he's right next to another patient.
Dozens dead from COVID-19. They got it at their local hospital. And lessons beyond the border, from intervention in Australia.
They're not rules that are against you, they are rules for you.
To laissez-faire in the Dakotas.
Their last dying words are, this can't be happening, it's not real.
COVID's cautionary tales. This is The National. Tonight, two regions, two COVID-19 realities, two approaches. In Nova Scotia, with about 36 new cases, tough new restrictions. While in Alberta, after a sixth day in a row with more than 1,000 cases, there's been a declaration of a public health emergency, yes, but also with a focus on the economy.
But we believe these are the minimum restrictions needed right now to safeguard our healthcare system while avoiding widespread damage to people's livelihoods.
Reporting 1,115 new cases. Alberta did announce new measures tonight, but not like regional lockdowns seen this week in Ontario. 3.5 times bigger than Alberta by population, but with fewer new cases today. Instead, the Premier announced a ban on indoor social gatherings and tighter limits on weddings and funerals. Carolyn Dunn walks us through the rest of the plan.
Carl Lovestrom would like you to know the COVID-19 he knows. His longtime friend Desmond Jarvis Brandon, an outspoken mask and social distancing advocate, died from the virus alone in isolation.
I hope this makes it more real for people. Desmond was a real person. He was 36 years old. He did not have to die.
The measures come as hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and deaths are rising exponentially.
If we do not slow the sharp rise of both hospitalizations and ICU admissions, they will threaten our ability to continue delivering health services that we all rely on.
Among the announced changes today, all grades 7 to 12 students will switch to online learning from Friday to the new year. Younger students will have an extra week added to their break. Masks will be mandatory at all indoor workplaces in Edmonton, Calgary, and surrounding areas. Sporting activities and concerts are temporarily cancelled.
Now is the time for all of Albertans to meet the moment. The restrictions on gatherings, on businesses, on places of worship will be evaluated after 3 weeks. If we see a significant drop in our new daily cases, we may be able to ease them.
But it's far from the strict lockdown some had hoped for. Retail businesses can remain open but are limited to 25% occupancy. Bars and restaurants can stay open until 11 p.m., but only people from the same household can dine together. It's not nearly as stringent as what some doctors and health experts had hoped.
So we're looking at a true humanitarian crisis. So widespread loss of life, looking at building things like field hospitals, outsourcing healthcare staff, a really grim and dangerous situation without a full lockdown.
So Carolyn, some Albertans think the measures don't go far enough, but certainly not everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be a segment of the population here in Alberta that think that they go too far. And, you know, they're an important part of Jason Kenney's political base, if you will. So important that he gave them a bit of a nod in his address today, saying that these measures are designed to balance the health emergency with economics, as well as the personal, fundamental freedoms and rights of Albertans.
All right, Carolyn Dunn, thank you very much. Now, in Atlantic Canada, after just 2 days this week, there's already been more new action against COVID-19 than we have seen in months. A full-force response to a rapid surge in cases. The worst news today came from Nova Scotia, which announced 37 new cases, by far the highest one-day total in 7 months. Consider it's used to daily numbers you can count on one hand, or zero. Kayla Hounsell shows us how it's now moving hard and fast to get back to those kinds of numbers.
before we dig in here.
This server is one of many clamoring to get a COVID-19 test. Nova Scotia wants anyone who's been to a bar after 10 p.m. in the Halifax area to get one. That's right, any bar, even if there are no symptoms. That's where most of the cases are coming from.
I think just in terms of being diligent, it's a good idea. I mean, like, the whole asymptomatic aspect of it all is pretty scary.
And the province's top doctor says that's exactly the point.
We believe that there is a large pool of people out there that are infected that they may not even know it themselves.
Just today, 4,000 signed up for a new streamlined testing process for people who've been to bars. Then there's this, a lineup for rapid testing for anyone, no matter where they've been.
Recently, I just had like a stomach flu, so I was just a little worried about it, so I thought I might just come down and get tested just in case.
The province is cracking down on the capital region to prevent the virus from seeping out.
If you haven't woken up to the second wave, this is your wake-up call.
Kathy Walker doesn't need a wake-up call. Her 100-year-old mother got COVID and survived during the first wave. Now, long-term care facilities are closed to visitors again.
I hate it, but it's the smart thing to do.
All right, here we go, guys.
This will be the last gym class for at least 2 weeks.
It's obviously a bummer, but it makes the most sense for stopping the spread of COVID.
Police are being given more power to dole out fines at gatherings with more than 5 people.
It's not just the host that can be fined. Every single person there can be fined $1,000.
Malls and other shops will stay open at 25% capacity. Restaurants will close.
It is a little scary, but it's at the end of the day, it's better than the alternative of it running more wild and rampant, right?
He's hoping things get back to Atlantic normal in a couple of weeks. Kayla Hounsel, CBC News, Halifax.
British Columbia is shutting down more indoor activities as the province hit a new case count high. BC reported 941 new cases of COVID-19 today. Nearly 700 were in the Fraser Health region. Health officials have ordered any spaces offering group indoor fitness activities to temporarily close and are urging people to socialize only with those people within their own households. Quebec's premier put some new limits today on his already controversial Christmas plan. The province is allowing gatherings of up to 10 people over the holidays, but now
we have to limit ourselves to 2 gatherings, so we can only organize 2 events with people who don't live with us.
It's still striking in a province that today reported 1,124 new cases. That number actually in line with a positive trend. Average daily case rates in Quebec have been flat or declining now for about 10 days, but pressure on the healthcare system has not let up. Quebec still leads the country in COVID-19 hospitalizations. Also, it leads the country in the number of deaths from the virus, 45 reported today alone. And the stress on healthcare is a factor in that. Alison Northcott looks at one hospital where patients aren't just getting COVID treatment, they're getting infected and sometimes dying from it.
At the St. Jerome Hospital, some staff say crowded conditions have led to serious problems, including in the emergency room.
You know, you have a COVID patient and the only thing separating him from the other patient, he's about 4 or 5 feet away, is just a curtain, and the patient's coughing his lungs out, but he's right next to another patient.
The Regional Health Authority confirms since the pandemic began, more than 80 people have died after catching COVID-19 at the hospital. Some doctors are urging their patients to leave the facility as soon as possible after certain surgeries. Because the longer they stay, says Dr. Yen Liu, the greater the risk of contracting COVID or something else. The problem, staff say, is an aging hospital too small for the growing population it serves. The Regional Health Authority denies mixing infected patients with those who have tested negative and says of the 8 units with recent outbreaks, all but 2 are now under control.
Ce dossier-là, il est encore une priorité.
Quebec's Health Minister Christian Dubé says the problems at the hospital are a priority. A temporary wing is in the works that will add 57 beds, but it won't be ready until January. And a permanent upgrade is more than 8 years from completion.
That's definitely an hospital that hasn't been able to control their own outbreaks.
Dr. Gilbert Boucher worries the situation in St. Jerome could play out in other hospitals if ERs get crowded in January.
We We've seen it in the previous years. Coming back from the holiday season, the emergencies are full, the hospitals are crowded, and then we need to put people in corridors, and we cannot do that with COVID.
But in St. Jerome, some staff say they have no choice until more beds are available. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Now to Ontario, which acknowledged a technical issue with yesterday's data. Today, the province announced 1,009 new cases, but says that number is artificially low. It was adjusted because Monday's total included several extra hours worth of data, meaning that number was inflated. And yesterday's 1,589 cases was not a record high. Now, Toronto is barely into its second lockdown, but one big tension point just got exposed. If someone breaks the rules, will they be punished? Today, a restaurant tested police, the rules, and the premier who made them. Magda Gabraselas shows us what happened.
A long line out the door and a packed dining room inside. A breach of 2-day-old lockdown rules.
Can you guys please move out of the way because you're blocking the entrance to my restaurant?
The owner posted a video Monday warning he would do this. Today, maskless customers showed up to be served. A nearby resident showed up too to air her frustrations.
We're red zone. We're supposed to be closed for a certain reason. Who does this guy think he is?
Under the province's emergency orders, individuals could face fines of $750 to $100,000. But while police and bylaw officers investigated, the restaurant kept serving customers.
People are so scared of getting fines, but there were no tickets given today.
Obviously, by the sheer number of people that are here right now, we don't have the ability to go in and physically remove everyone at this point.
Later, police acknowledged this was a mistake. And here's how Doug Ford responded.
I'm not going to get up here and start pounding a small business owner when the guy's holding on by his fingernails. I don't condone it. I don't condone that he opened up. But, I feel terrible. My heart breaks for these guys, and it's not fair. But please, in saying all that, you've got to follow the protocols and the guidelines.
I think that it's an ambiguous message.
This expert says people want clear messages from their leaders.
On the one hand, I'm going to say that it's a lockdown, but on the other hand, I'm not going to do it if you do anything about it if you defy it. So I think my guess would be that we're going to see more of this. Why wouldn't we?
Officials in the end did shut down the restaurant. Now the councillor for the area wants the owner to face the maximum fine. Magda Gabraselas, CBC News, Toronto.
Today, Ontario also announced it's starting to deploy more rapid COVID-19 tests. They're seen by many as a key weapon in stopping the virus's spread. But here in Canada, so far, they haven't stopped much of anything. Vic Adopi explains why.
My friends, the new rapid tests are game changers.
Rapid tests aren't as accurate as lab tests, but they get results fast. Ontario just received $2 million from Ottawa to be used in dozens of nursing homes, hospitals, and testing centers, but it's still nowhere near enough. Canada trails many developed countries in testing rates, with just 2 tests performed for every 1,000 people. Italy and Lithuania do twice as many tests, even more for the UK and US, while Denmark is doing far more. In a weekend rapid testing blitz, Slovakia tested more than half the country.
They had a dramatic reduction in cases. This is probably the best strategy. Use all of our rapid tests, screen populations, and find the hidden pockets of infection.
The Canadian government has distributed 5 million rapid tests so far, some being used on these students in Nova Scotia today. Ottawa has procured 38 million rapid tests, enough in theory to test everyone in Canada just once.
If we could test every Canadian every day, would we reduce COVID? Absolutely. Can we afford to do that? Probably. Can we operationalize it technically? No, not today.
One setback is that the federal government has yet to approve dozens of other types of rapid tests to meet our needs. Places such as BC and Ottawa Public Health are also still evaluating the rapid tests for accuracy, even though they're used elsewhere in the world. But the rapid tests aren't being used on a mass scale in Canada.
They're meant to carpet bomb a population, find the hidden pockets, and then isolate them.
Federal officials have their doubts.
It's not going to be a sort of the silver bullet on its own. Certainly we're also hearing situation stories
people becoming tired, and not wanting to go getting tested.
Tired or not, more testing is in our future. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, testing aside, beating COVID-19 hinges on vaccinating as many people as quickly as possible. Today, the Prime Minister reassured Canadians that Ottawa has already purchased millions of doses, but what he didn't offer was a timeline. David Cochrane explains why.
The Prime Minister says Canadians will get their vaccines, just not before some Europeans and Americans get theirs.
Canada no longer has any domestic production capacity for vaccines.
So Canada had to go vaccine shopping. The government says it's near the front of the queue, but behind the countries that have developed and will manufacture the vaccines.
Countries like the United States, Germany, and the UK do have domestic pharmaceutical facilities, which is why they're obviously going to prioritize helping their citizens first.
That's why Canada secured hundreds of millions of doses from a broad range of potential vaccines, including the 3 leading candidates, to create as broad a supply chain as possible. But the early days of the pandemic showed it can be hard to get what you paid for.
We had 3 million masks that were stopped by U.S. officials.
As the U.S. and other countries put export restrictions on PPE, threatening critical supply chains. That crisis was avoided. The hope is enough has changed that it won't be repeated.
We have signed strong contracts with various vaccine companies, and we are working closely with allies on ensuring that there is a free flow of delivery of contracts.
Until then, government is buying freezers for transportation and storage and everything they need to stick needles in arms.
We have already received enough deliveries of syringes and needles to administer 24 million doses of vaccines.
Vaccine rollout is expected to happen early next year, weeks, maybe months after the U.S. and the UK plan to start. A home field advantage that comes from developing the most coveted drugs on Earth. David Cochrane, CBC News, Ottawa.
Cases, meanwhile, continue to soar in the United States. And with Thanksgiving just days away, testing sites around the country have been inundated.
I've been here now for over 2.5 hours, so I can finally see the end.
Even as officials recommend not traveling for Thanksgiving, millions are still insisting on gathering for the holiday. Commercial labs are warning that their capacities are being stretched. But it'll take more than testing to solve the problem in North and South Dakota. Those two states have some of the highest infection and death rates, not just in the United States, but in the entire world. Still, as Cameron McIntosh tells us, governors of both states have been resisting restrictions.
In North Dakota's largest city, masks are now required as the state grapples with a virus that has now claimed 1 in every 1,000 residents.
We didn't take COVID very seriously as a state as a whole.
I think we should have had a mandate a couple months ago to slow this thing down.
Bordering Manitoba with half the population, North Dakota has 10 times the infection rate.
If this virus hadn't been here, he would still be alive.
Manitoba-born 58-year-old Tony Lepke was a truck driver living in Fargo. His sister says he was taking precautions.
It's a serious virus that we really need to get under control.
Among the reddest of red states, North Dakota largely put individual liberties ahead of collective health initiatives, only requiring masks once hospitals were overwhelmed. Neighboring South Dakota still is not.
There was a day last week where we hit actually 88% positivity.
As the warning of health officials meet resistance against broad public health restrictions.
I really feel that this country really needs to stand up for what it believes.
If people choose not to, we still should treat them with respect.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem has been criticized for downplaying the danger of the virus.
My people are happy. They're happy because they're free.
Messaging that has left many believing COVID is a hoax, says this nurse.
And their last dying words are, this can't be happening, it's not real.
Meanwhile, gatherings in both states, like the 365,000 people at the Sturgis motorcycle rally last August, have led to outbreaks in other parts of the U.S. That closed border with Manitoba proving to be a critical line to keeping it from spreading. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Well, one of the first Indigenous players in the NHL passed away today.
My dream was to come NHL. I wanted to play NHL.
Hockey pioneer Fred Sasakamoose died in hospital after a 5-day fight with COVID-19. He played 11 NHL games after a storied junior career. He was named to the Order of Canada in 2017. Fred Sasakamoose was 86 years old. Well, Russia is adding its vaccine to the list of promising candidates around the world.
These results are consistent with what we see with other vaccines.
Next on The National, what we know about this potentially cheaper possibility. How Australia became one of the few in the world to beat back a second wave.
We had one of the world's longest lockdowns.
And the big Canadian Grammy snub.
When you create these genre categories, you're ghettoizing artists.
We're back in 2 minutes.
This is the perfect day to stay at home. If you don't need to get out, I wouldn't get out.
Well, a blizzard ripping through parts of Labrador had people shoveling mountains of snow today and expecting more overnight. Some areas have already seen up to 70 centimeters, 7-0. Blizzard warnings remain in effect in the region as winds strengthen, creating near zero visibility and pretty treacherous travel conditions. Stay safe out there. Okay, back to COVID-19. Russia has released preliminary results for its vaccine, Sputnik V. And as Chris Brown tells us, it appears to be highly effective, easy to distribute, and cheaper than 2 of the others, showing promise.
Long before there was any real proof, Russia was hyping its COVID vaccine, named Sputnik V after past glories in space. It claimed it showed stunning effectiveness. Most Western countries were skeptical. A few, such as Hungary, where the vaccine was shipped this week, decided to do their own trials. So, for Russian developers, today was something of an I told you so moment. It's a great day for Russia and a great day for the world, said vaccine financier Kirill Dmitriev. Gamaleya, the vaccine maker, says based on a study of 19,000 volunteers who took the initial jab and a booster, it demonstrated 95% efficacy after 42 days, and the vaccine reported no unexpected side effects. This British expert believes there's no reason to doubt the findings.
These results are consistent with what we see with other vaccines, because the really big message for global health scientists is that this disease is able to be addressed by vaccines.
At $20 US a person, Sputnik V is cheaper than at least 2 of the other vaccines, and it doesn't need to be stored at very cold temperatures, making distribution easier. With COVID ravaging Russia's hospitals, the government's been promising and then delaying a national vaccination campaign, which has helped fuel public and scientific skepticism. Today, as he welcomed new diplomats, President Vladimir Putin said the world needs many vaccines, and Russia wants to be a team player and share its experiences. Canada is not one of the countries that's put in orders for the Russian vaccine, though 50 other nations have. What's in doubt is Russia's ability to make that much. Chris Brown, CBC News, Moscow.
Now, we've convened a special panel tonight because we have questions on a few different topics. Dr. Zain Chagla and Dr. Lisa Barrett, 2 infectious diseases specialists, joining us now. And Dr. Chagla, maybe we'll start with Sputnik, since that's what we're talking about here. My understanding is that it's based on the same technology as the AstraZeneca vaccine, but seems on early results to be noticeably more effective. I mean, why would that be?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of controversy with this vaccine and how it's been studied and the transparency of the data. So all of this has to be taken with a grain of salt. If truly there is a difference between the 2 vaccines, there may be a biologic plausibility to this. This uses an adenovirus-based vector. So it tries to use a chimpanzee adenovirus that really doesn't do anything in the human host to inject the genetic code to then start making the protein. The problem with this vaccine is if the body makes too much of a response to the adenovirus, it doesn't go through all those other steps to make immunity. What the Russians may have done is used a different strain for the initial dose and the booster dose to kind of counteract that effect so that the body sees something naive each time. So there might be a biologic reason why this vaccine is a bit different than the AstraZeneca vaccine. But again, it may all be just related to data and that analysis too.
Right. So with the same caveat that we haven't seen any of the raw data really with any of the vaccine trials so far. So we're only basing this on what the various companies tell us. You think the results here are plausible?
There's a biologic reason technically, and this is the Achilles heel with this vaccine. And hopefully, if this is the real reason, it could be applied even to the Oxford vaccine moving forward.
Let's switch gears to rapid testing. Dr. Barrett, you're in Halifax, but where exactly and doing what?
We are out and about at a campus in the community that we set up today at around 1 o'clock to reach out to people who do not have any COVID symptoms, general members of the community, to offer them a rapid COVID test. And we've been doing that since 1 o'clock. It's about 8 o'clock in the evening, and we've had just over 500 people stream by today to get a rapid test.
And I guess the important point here being the one you just mentioned, that you're trying to capture particular people that conventional testing perhaps wouldn't.
Right. In most parts of Canada right now, the gold standard test has to be done in a laboratory, and that means taking up healthcare resources, which in many places are at their limit. And so most places are not reaching out to people without symptoms in a virus where we know spread happens when people don't have symptoms. We're reaching out to exactly that population to find out if people are positive, find them early, because we really are at a point where we could go one of two ways in Nova Scotia: massively increase tests or keep it under control.
And what kind of results have you gotten so far? I mean, you mentioned hundreds of people that you've tested.
Right. So we're still tabulating the results for tonight. We literally have not pulled that together. But when we did this at another site on Saturday night, we had 147 people. One person was positive. Again, all people without any symptoms at all. And this one person that we identified as positive, that turns out to a 0.8% rate. Doesn't sound like a lot until you realize if 0.8% of people are walking around with no symptoms, they're spreading to other people. So it was a good catch. They lived with a bunch of other people, and we were able to tell them to isolate early, even before they had symptoms. So we're hoping to do the same thing this evening and then to roll this out around the province over the next week or two.
That is very interesting. Last topic here, the announcement from Canada's Prime Minister today on a deal for a new treatment option for COVID.
We need access to as many potential vaccines and treatments as possible. Today, I can announce that we've signed a deal to secure up to 26,000 doses of a therapeutic drug from Eli Lilly, with options for thousands more.
Dr. Barrett, what can this drug do?
Well, it's an antibody, and it's meant to act as if you'd had a vaccine and make your body respond in a way that limits viral spread. It's most useful, most likely, very early in infection, so people with mild or early moderate disease. And in those people, we're looking for a subgroup of folks who may go on to develop more severe disease. So people who may be older, have a high body mass index, those who have immune compromise or underlying respiratory disease. So right now, our toolbox around therapeutics in that domain is not full, and this offers at least some option for those people to have a therapeutic that might prevent them from going on to develop more severe disease.
And Dr. Chagla, the last word to you. I mean, and taking what Dr. Barrett has said into account in terms of the way this drug might be used, in your mind, is this a game changer? Does this dramatically change the landscape? What does it do?
I mean, the results that have come out around this drug are still very early. I think there may be some roles for this in very high-risk individuals, but really has to be balanced against some of the logistics of rolling it out. And so, hopefully there's more experience that gets gained with this over time as the company finishes its trial in the United States too. We get a better sense of who really needs this drug and what the systemic effects from a hospital utilization standpoint are going to be from this.
Doctors, I always love having the chance to talk to you both. Dr. Chagla, Dr. Barrett, thank you so much.
Thank you.
No problem.
And next, a success story from Down Under.
You're there in Australia, I'm here in Canada. What's the big difference?
Well, we're doing much better.
What lessons could Canada learn from a country that beat back the second wave? And later, the Canadian who came to the rescue of an American and her family stranded in northern BC. Welcome back. As cases in Australia slow to a trickle, its biggest states have started to reopen this week after a shutdown of about 4 months. That cost 1 million jobs and thousands of businesses. But many there say, having now lived through it, it was the way to go. David Common explains.
Less than 2 weeks ago, Australian authorities moved fast to clamp down. Curfews imposed, beaches, streets, stores emptied in the city of Adelaide. Everyone ordered to lock down at home. And all this after 9 people tested positive. Just 9.
It makes sense, doesn't it? You know what I mean? We don't want to end up like other parts of the world.
Australia has been extremely serious about its lockdowns. When the second wave hit in the summer, authorities didn't pause. Nearly every business in Melbourne was forced to close. There are limits on how many people can return to the country, and when they do, mandatory quarantine hotels guarded by soldiers. Police checkpoints to ensure no one was ever more than 25 kilometers from home, and $1,300 fines readily handed out to the rule breakers. Politicians didn't mess around.
They're not rules that are against you, they are rules for you. Your safety, your job, your community, your family, your state.
There is no second chance to stop a second wave.
You're there in Australia, I'm here in Canada. What's the big difference?
Well, we're doing much better. That's the obvious difference. It's one of the few places in the world that's actually managed to suppress a real second wave. And that was because we had one of the world's longest lockdowns.
Canadian Dr. Nancy Baxter moved to Melbourne just before COVID closed nearly everything. She heads the University of Melbourne School of Population and Global Health.
Are you in a cabin?
I am in a cabin. Yeah, it's a good question. So I was in the United States on an assignment. And as you know, when you return to Canada, you have to do 2 weeks of quarantine, which I am doing in a cabin in the woods, very alone. So you and I might talk for 9 hours just for my companionship, right?
Jokes aside, Dr. Baxter has family in Canada.
Hi, Mom. How are you?
And she's worried about home.
Hearing what's happened in Ontario, it's pretty shocking. So they just kind of have changed the policy to just basically admit defeat and say they're going to let the epidemic just run wild in Ontario.
But do you think, I mean, that's a pretty big thing to say. You know, politically, it's hard to try to shut down your entire economy. That's cost jobs in Australia. It's cost jobs here in Canada. What has been the priority in Australia?
You can't have a well-functioning economy with a raging pandemic. It's not an economy versus lives.
Today, some 16,200 retail stores, 5,800 cafes and restaurants, and about 1,000 beauty salons and 800 pubs can reopen their doors.
After 3 months of a second lockdown, Melbourne is emerging gradually. Restaurants reopening, stores too, and COVID cases, remarkably, they're at or near 0 nationwide. But 1 million jobs have been lost, thousands of businesses too.
I think clearly we've done better, and we've gone about it the right way, going for the aggressive suppression to 0. But on the other hand, I don't own a bar that's gone under.
Jason Dutton is another Canadian living in Melbourne, glad to be back outdoors again, albeit wearing a mask. As he says, everyone did for months. No questions asked.
When the government came out, they mandated masks the first week of August, and there was about 20 seconds of complaining. And then everybody emerged with like a mask that matched their shirt.
And Jason says there isn't much appetite for political waffling over what measures to take or how quickly, when his state saw growth 5 times less than where many Canadian provinces are now. Politicians simply locked everything down.
There has been this kind of push-pull in Canada between locking down to control the virus and still allowing the economy to exist, to thrive as much as possible. And that's meant that there hasn't necessarily been a public push to drive COVID numbers to zero, just to get them to a manageable level. What's the message been in Australia?
The unofficial policy, which has clearly been followed, has been elimination. Because Australia is unique in that we can really control who comes in and out of the country.
Australia certainly has geographic advantages, but those alone don't explain how it is now one of the few countries in the world, and one with many similarities to Canada, to virtually eliminate COVID through nearly draconian measures. David Common, CBC News, Plevna, Ontario.
And we'll be right back with the Nova Scotia company that wants your garbage.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, Tom. How's it going?
I brought my garbage for you.
And wait till you see what they can do with all that waste. Well, as Ottawa announced plans to ban single-use plastics last month, a Nova Scotia company was hard at work on a solution it hoped could help solve the plastic problem. It's about scaling up a potentially game-changing technology designed to turn 90% of household garbage into energy. Tom Murphy got a behind-the-scenes look.
Did you know Canadians produce roughly 30 million tons of garbage a year? That's a lot. And get this, in many municipalities, only 30% of it gets recycled. That's not very much.
Now, what if I told you there's a company in Chester, Nova Scotia that claims to have technology that can turn that trash into treasure, so to speak? Sound too good to be true?
Well, at Sustain Technologies, they say they can turn your bag of waste into fuel with minimal impact on the environment.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, Tom. How's it going?
I brought my garbage for you.
So says this guy, Peter Vinyl. I'm not kidding, vinyl, as in the plastic. Yep, and he's assembled quite the gadget to do it. More on that in a second.
So I see a coffee cup here. Most places in Canada will not recycle this. I see some metal here, a metal container. We'll recover that metal 100%. I see some foam here, packaging. Typically you can't recycle that. We'll turn that into diesel. Okay, Tom, this is the start of our process where the garbage is going in. So I'm going to throw your bag in.
First step, shred it to bits. Then put it through 15 different steps of separation. And they don't even have to lay a finger on any of it.
This is an eddy current effect separator, where any aluminum, like you just saw there, is going to get, it comes along, it's negatively charged, it hits a positively charged roll with a high voltage inside, and it flips off at an angle. So that's how we separate the aluminum.
The metal you see flying there, that gets recycled.
So with the metal gone, what's left is plastic, paper, cardboard, diapers. We can cook that, get it to separate so that we can make real useful products.
That's right, cook it or heat it up, not burn it. That would be bad for the environment.
What we're doing here is unmaking them. So we're allowing them to break apart so that we can then separate them.
Then the biomass is turned into pellets for industrial heating, diverting up to 90% of waste from the landfill.
That's biomass. So that would, your coffee cup, your tissue, your diapers, it's clean biomass. So that's carbon neutral fuel that can be used to replace fossil fuel.
And that pesky plastic that never breaks down in the landfill?
So we've got high resolution cameras under this orange unit here that are looking at, and they scan every particle in real time, and then they fire off. We've got 250 air jets there, and they're timed to shoot and hit the plastic and accept it. Pretty cool, huh?
And that plastic is heated up too, turning it back into oil, diesel and kerosene to be exact, which is used to fuel the plant itself. The whole process to recycle my bag that would have otherwise gone to the landfill takes 2.5 hours. Still back at the curb with the rest of my garbage, there's skepticism. Marla McLeod is an environmentalist with the Ecology Action Centre.
We need to start thinking more systemically about the problems we're creating as a society. So this is a way to, to fix plastics we've already produced. It is a Band-Aid over that. But again, I would caution investing heavily in infrastructure that perpetuates the status quo and perpetuates our consumer throwaway culture.
And you know what, I have sympathy for that view. But inevitably there's going to be some plastic. And so you just can't turn that faucet off right away. So we're going to take garbage from a population of 150,000 people, and in environmental terms we're going to have the equivalent reduction of 40,000 cars off the road in this first plant.
And they're not stopping there. They plan to eventually mine landfills, reducing methane emissions and greenhouse gases. Yes, in this little community, they're thinking big. Tom Murphy, CBC News, Chester, Nova Scotia.
When we come back, the Grammy nominations are out with a few surprises. The snubs, the backlash, and the criticism right after the break.
I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast Front Burner, new details from a Fifth Estate documentary into the Portapique Massacre, Canada's worst mass shooting. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
The nominations for the 63rd Grammy Awards are out. Beyoncé leads the pack, but Canadian artists are getting some attention as well. Justin Bieber received 4 nominations.
Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry.
And Drake got 3, including one for Best Rap Song. Montreal producer Kate Renata also has 3 nominations. The ceremony airs on Sunday, January 31st. But when the Grammy ceremony takes place next year, it will no longer have the category of Urban Contemporary Album. It was a push from the Academy to make the award more inclusive. But as Eli Glasner tells us, that may have backfired.
It's been a good year for The Weeknd. He had a #1 album, will be performing at the Super Bowl,
The Weeknd,
and won 3 times at the American Music Awards on Sunday. Today, The Weeknd was shut out. The Canadian musician went to Twitter to call out the Grammys, saying, "The Grammys remain corrupt. You owe me, my fans, and the industry transparency."
When you create these genre categories, you're ghettoizing artists, whether you intend to or not. And it's entirely possible that The Weeknd could have had his votes split.
As the popularity of Latin, R&B, and hip-hop music has grown, the musicians shut out of the big awards have been speaking out. Last year, Tyler, the Creator, won Best Rap Album for Igor, a record that was much more than rap. Backstage, he sounded off on the Grammys' urban music categories.
And I don't like that urban word. It's just a politically correct way to say the N-word.
This year, the Grammys removed the word urban from major awards to stop pigeonholing black artists. But this morning, the pop vocal category was all white.
And it seems as though artists who fall outside of a very narrow box that is dictated by skin color seem to be shut out of those broader kind of bigger categories.
And when it came to the most prestigious category, Album of the Year, it wasn't Beyonce or Megan Thee Stallion, but Coldplay. And one album featuring a black lead singer, the Black Pumas, with a record that's quite familiar.
The album they released last year, they released in an expanded form this year, and that got nominated for Album of the Year. So I think that kind of shows you how sort of out of touch.
The Grammys say they reward excellence, but critics say if the awards don't solve these problems, they risk irrelevance. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, next on The National, an American family stranded in northern BC, stuck on their way to Alaska. How a Canadian helped them find their way. It's our moment. Lynn Marchessault and her family lived in Georgia, but her husband was deployed with the American military to Alaska. So Lynn and her kids decided to move there to be with him. Perfectly normal situation, except the journey was long, and after their tire blew, things got worse, and with 2 days still to go, Lynn just couldn't bear to keep driving. But then a BC man stepped in to help. It's our moment.
I saw the post saying that a family needed help. So I took the time off work and went and drove her to Alaska. She started out in Georgia with summer tires on her truck. She thought they were all seasons, but when she got to 101, which is just past Fort St. John, she hit a snowstorm. But when she got there, her nerves were shot. She couldn't drive any further. Somebody shouldn't have to go through that. She was a little nervous because, of course, we were strangers. We talked the whole way. The kids were playing games. It was 1,700 kilometers, which we did in about 2.5 days. I wore gloves. I had a mask on. Lynn and the kids wore a mask the whole way. It was actually a great trip.
So wild story, right? And so here's the best part. Gary drives the family all the way to Alaska. How is he going to get back? He has no vehicle. Local community members step in, local politicians step in, they secure him a flight right back home. That's the National for this November 24th. Have a great night.